Another consequence of this view was the second dogma of science: all matter is unconscious. This becomes the question, is matter unconscious? Well, for Descartes and the mechanistic founders of science, matter was defined as unconscious. That was what was unconscious. Consciousness was separated off from matter, so it existed only in human minds, angels, and God. The rest of nature was totally unconscious, made up of matter that was just pushed around by external forces. So this was a dualistic view, and that dualistic view dominated science up until the 19th century. But increasingly in the 19th century, many people hated the idea there were two things, two quite different things, matter and spirit, or matter and mind. And lots of people wanted there to be just one. They thought two was too many. Personally, I think two's too few. But those who thought two were too many went in one of two directions. Either it's all matter and the mind doesn't really exist, it's a kind of illusion that just exists in human brains, or it's all consciousness, in which case matter just arises somehow from a universal mind. Now that view is familiar in Eastern philosophy and was of course put forward in British philosophy by Bishop Berkeley. But those two views, either idealism or materialism, are both inadequate. But nevertheless, materialism came to dominate science. No one could prove what the human mind was. You couldn't weigh it, you couldn't put it in a test tube, and it was simply assumed it didn't exist. So all matter became unconscious. But then that creates the terrible problem of explaining how is it that we're conscious. We've got brains, but if our brains are conscious, how can they be conscious if matter's unconscious? And this is what's called in the philosophy of mind the hard problem. The very existence of consciousness doesn't fit with materialism. And materialists have done all sorts of things to try and explain it away as an illusion, an epiphenomenon, just a way of talking about brain activity. But none of these materialist theories are very convincing even to other materialists, which is why there are so many of them. The idea that matter is unconscious runs up into a terrible problem in relation to the fact we're conscious. We may say that animals are conscious too, or we may deny a consciousness to animals, but at least humans are conscious, undeniably. So how do we deal with it? Just to say it's nothing but the brain is what Francis Crick called the astonishing hypothesis. It's a claim that our minds are nothing but the physical activity of our brains, that our minds are nothing but genetically programmed computers, the software of genetically programmed computers inside our heads. We ourselves are numbering robots, in Richard Dawkins' vivid phrase. And of course we have no free will, because free will would imply something that's able to choose. The mechanism can't choose. Now, this is a literally incredible point of view, and it's amazing how many intelligent, educated people are prepared to defend it. But, of course, they always make an exception for themselves, because otherwise they're only spouting materialist theories because they're genetically or socially programmed to do so. They have no free choice in the matter according to their own philosophy. So it's a kind of self-refuting hypothesis, and people argue for it very cleverly, and then as soon as they've finished arguing for it, they revert to the ordinary common sense point of view, that they do have some measure of freedom, their mind's not just their brain, and so forth. So it's literally incredible. And some philosophers in the materialist camp have finally come to the conclusion that this just won't do. And the most eminent who put forward this view recently is Galen Strawson. And Galen Strawson argues in a recent paper in the Journal of Consciousness Studies called Does Materialism Imply Panpsychism? He argued that you can't really get consciousness from something that's intrinsically unconscious, like this mechanistic view of matter. There has to be some level of consciousness even in the simplest material systems like electrons or atoms. Well, this was greeted with howls of protest from the materialist philosophy world, but he stood his ground, and this is now, surprisingly, a big debate in the realms of academic, materialist, atheistic philosophy. But the idea that there's a kind of consciousness in all matter is not a new idea. It's what Aristotle believed. He believed that matter was shaped by forms, that matter was a potentiality that was shaped in all beings by souls, in all living beings. It's what St. Thomas Aquinas thought too. And after Descartes, there was already a reaction in the 17th century against this kind of extreme dualism. Leibniz, a contemporary of Newton's and who invented the calculus independently of Newton, was convinced that matter was made up of what he called monads, which had both bodies and minds, and each monad reflected the universe from its own point of view. Each monad mirrored the whole universe. Spinoza had a different way of combining mind and body. He thought that mind and body were two aspects of the same reality, which in its largest level he called God or nature, and that there was a material and mental aspect to everything. So right back in the 17th century, very soon after Descartes, we have a kind of panpsychist view, the idea that there's a psyche or soul in all things.